I'd like to welcome Nat here today. He was meant to be here with his wife, Michaela, but unfortunately, Michaela's not feeling too well, is she?
That's correct, yes.
So please send our regards to your dear wife.
I will do, thank you.
Now, Nat, you and your wife have been a member of the congregation for a number of years now.
That's right, yes.
And I believe you first came to the congregation in 2003.
That's right, yes.
And then you married your lovely wife in 2012.
Yes, that's correct.
For the sake of our viewers, could you give us kind of a brief snapshot of your journey in the congregation?
Yes, I first came to the congregation of Yahweh in 2003, and that was on the back of me kind of wanting more out of my life. My life had took a turn for the worse, should I say. And I started to ask those questions, is there more to life? I wasn't brought up in a religious family at all, but I remember being at a very low place in my life and just saying, God, if you're real, please, help me. And I had an encounter with the Holy Spirit before I stepped through any church door or anything. And as a result of that encounter, something within me changed. And I was naturally led through the doors of the congregation of Yahweh back in 2003. And what really, the first thing that I felt is as I walked through the doors, I felt at home. That was the feeling. I've come home. So I always remember that because I didn't need to go anywhere else. I didn't need to visit any other churches. I just felt at home. And what really attracted me to the church was the diversity of the members within the church, the different ethnicities, the broad range of age group of people. Yes, that was my journey into the congregation. I've stayed since and gone on a remarkable journey. Yeshua's really met me and enabled me to be part of this church and to grow in ministry, and I've been part of the ministry team for a number of years now.
Okay, that's good. I mean, you mentioned in your description of your journey the word change.
Yes.
And that's something that's happening a lot at the moment.
Yes.
There's a lot of change happening, and we see from our media platforms that there's a lot of headlines being made.
That's right.
Other than COVID-19.
Yes.
Obviously that is dominating a lot of our headlines at the moment. But something that happened back in May the 25th, I believe, and something that reached the world media and caused a global reaction was the unjust treatment of George Floyd at the hands, really, of someone that should have known better. It was the police, it was authority, and they mistreated a human being in the way that they did. Now, could you give me what your first reaction to that situation was on hearing what happened to George Floyd?
When I first saw what happened, I wasn't able to continue watching it. I was absolutely heartbroken, deeply angered, deeply upset, and it took a lot to make sense and process what happened to George Floyd. Unfortunately, it was something that it's not the first time I've heard or witnessed, unjust treatment on behalf of the police or on behalf of another human to another person. But for me, it was almost like enough's enough. That's kind of the feeling that it generated within me. And I think because I've heard, and a lot of people over the world have heard about different unjust things that happen, but it's not usually recorded. It's usually a person's word against another. and this was visually seen, and I think it was the coldness and the inhumane treatment that resulted in his life being taken. So it really deeply affected me and my household. And we was already going through stuff within our household, having younger children that had already started to ask questions from the treatment of other people at the hands of police. So it just really, it rocked us as a household.
And because of that image, I suppose, of
Yes.
what the world media saw, it really impacted your family to the degree that, would you think that a correct analysis was that you almost became numb at the situation?
Yeah, you couldn't make sense of it, Isaac, to be honest. And eventually I did watch what happened to George, but you can't make sense of it. You just wouldn't think that would happen. And I say unfortunately because I'm already aware of these types of things happening, unjust treatment, especially against black people, whether it's in America or, more closer to home. And I'm not saying that black people are the only people that are unjustly treated, but there's countless accounts of, severe treatment of individuals. So the difference with this is that the world saw it. So
and there was a global
yes,
reaction to
absolutely,
it.
yeah.
And I think that took a lot of people by surprise. The speed in which the reaction was from the world. I mean, a phrase that is echoed in our media is the systematic discrimination and treatment of others. And for some, because of what happened to George Floyd, you might be one such person, but for some, it has awakened some emotions that has possibly stemmed from personal experience with regards to discrimination. Has that affected you in that way at all?
I would say for myself, it definitely tapped into those experiences. Things were already awakened, Isaac, in that for me as a person, for me having children, it's something that we live with anyway and are mindful of and aware of, if that makes sense. But yes, the conversation in my household is with my 13-year-old daughter, that she's scared to have children because she's fearful how they may be treated because of the colour of their skin. And to even think about that kind of conversation with my 13-year-old daughter is absolutely heartbreaking. And that's a conversation we was engaged in even before what happened to George Floyd. And we're trying our best as parents to navigate our daughter through those emotions, those feelings, those experiences that she's kind of putting together for herself. She's feeling a sense of being unsafe because of the colour of her skin and her fear for her future or her children. So we're trying to manage that. And then what happened with George. So yes, it definitely brought up a lot and it brings up a lot. And, I have my own experiences through my childhood. I'm of dual heritage descent, my father being Ghanaian, my mum being white British. And the experiences that kind of I encountered in my own household, when I was born, my mum's side of the family wasn't too accepting of my father, and my mum encountered a lot of prejudice and racism, and that translated onto me. And my father, because of his ancestral experiences, was mistrusting of white people. I say he didn't trust because he was fearful. So there was a lot in the family melting pot anyway. And I think going into my early teenage years, I encountered racism.
Is that personally towards you?
Oh, personally towards me, having to literally defend myself against grown men. You know, starting with verbal racism, but then physical assaults. So I've been in physical fights from a young age because of racism. And, you know, I think myself in my teenage years, what I did was I kind of built up a hard exterior. I was against the system, so I wanted to fight back against that, and that led to me getting into a lot of trouble because I was rebelling against my environment, what I was encountering, and some of that racism and brutality was at the hands of police. So I've been severely beaten by police in Cyprus, and I've been assaulted by police in the UK in my younger years. So I've got my own experience of experiencing racism, but my experience, you know, I hear far worse from others. But that was kind of part of my early experiences, should I say.
You mentioned with regard to your father's experience that his opinion of white people was kind of ancestral. Do you think what we're seeing now happening, it is something that is ancestral, passed on through generations? The mistreatment of others I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think you know, there's definitely a connection there. I think the impact of colonialism is definitely still here today. It's such a deep subject, and it's something that I've had to look into myself to understand. In my role, I work with people who have encountered a lot of racism. So a lot of their traumas is related to their experiences of racism. So I've looked into a lot of things, and I think the impact of colonialism was what it did was it elevated a race above another. So we still, for me, I still see that in how it plays out. We may not be in times of slavery anymore, but the systems that are in place definitely disadvantage black people, but also people from BAME backgrounds. It definitely disadvantages that, and we have seen movement and progression, but I think at the core of the systems and the structures, it's very much still present. And I think that's why we still in 2020 encounter such injustice. And it's very difficult for, you know, for black people in particular to progress because of the barriers that are there, if that makes sense. So I definitely think that some of the ancestral things that happened contribute to where we are today. That's not to say that in this generation everybody thinks like the ancestors, but the structures are still there, and I believe that gets in the way massively.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the positives of being part of the church family is that, and we read it in Scripture, and that is, if one suffers, you know, we all suffer. In your opinion, do you think that is being played out in the church? Do you feel that people are sympathetic towards some of our members' experience and feelings?
It's hard to gauge because I don't think, I know for myself, I've never, around these types of matters, I've never really discussed at length with my church family. And I think part of the challenge for me and what I see is it's very difficult to have this type of dialogue for a variety of reasons. There can be times where you may want to open up and talk about things, but if you're not understood, that can cause you to retreat or something that I find, and this is not, I wouldn't say relating to the congregation as such, although there are times where you're almost having to justify your experience and defend your experience, and that can cause people to kind of shut down. And I think the danger in that, and I know in my own experience, is that people just carry stuff themselves and kind of muddle on through, if that makes sense. So
kind of deal with it and just carry on.
Yeah.
I know for me personally, what I saw from that media report about George Floyd, like most people, I was incredibly shocked. Because it was a treatment of a human being. And if I was to be brutally honest with you, I didn't grasp the depth of feeling in some of our members immediately. And it wasn't till the, I don't know if you saw that documentary about the Windrush scandal, and it wasn't till that I suddenly realised the depth of this issue. And if I was to be brutally honest with you, at that moment, I almost crashed into a depressive state because A, I was ashamed to be white, and B, I was even ashamed to be British, because I couldn't believe that was still happening and that happened in 2017, and I couldn't believe that happened. Now our congregation has a long history with people of black origin, and because of that we have a high black membership, of people of colour membership. It depends what the correct political term is for that, black or people of colour. But the action we see from a global perspective is because of the treatment of a person of colour. Okay. Now, you mentioned before that we have a multicultural congregation. Now, there may be a lot of white members who, like myself, felt an element of guilt, because of what happened to George Floyd. And, they could be sitting back, thinking about this George Floyd, and feeling guilty towards possibly people like yourself, because of your history, where you're coming from, because you are a person of colour. What would you like to say to people that are feeling that way, are feeling a sense of guilt because they are white?
Isaac, it's when I first hear you say it, it saddens me. It does sadden me. It's so very difficult. It's such a difficult set of circumstances. And I think these types of conversations, what's happening in our world, it's certainly, my hope is it's not to make our white brethren to feel guilty. Far from that. It's more from because we are a multicultural congregation, it's more from a viewpoint of that we can go on a journey together to understand and educate, because the truth is something remarkable has come out of the tragedy of George Floyd, is that humanity has stood up and spoken. Not just black people, not just white people, but humanity has stood up. And when humanity stands up, change happens. So I think that this terrible circumstances has enabled an opportunity that I've not seen in my lifetime in terms of the response of humanity. You know, when these things have been happening for many, many years, and it will be the black community that rise up and stand, or they get support, but never ever seen such a support from the whole world. And when that happens, change happens. And I think part of the frustration is it's difficult to be heard and understood. And we're in 2020, Isaac. I was looking at some information, and in the last 800 years, the impact of slavery has cost over 60 million lives of African people, whether they was taken through the Arabian route, through the Egyptian route, and in modern days through transatlantic slavery. Over 60 million lives has lost as a result of slavery. So there's something very, very tragic that is happening, that in 2020, that energy, that feeling is still there. And I think that when we as human beings together stand up and say enough is enough, then change will happen. I understand that we are in the end times. So from a spiritual perspective, I get it. I get that things are only going to get worse in many different ways. But as human beings, I believe, and we're seeing a change. We're seeing things, there's more dialogue, there is more consideration at many different levels. And changes are happening because the world stood up and spoke. So it's almost like arm in arm, we've had enough of this. It's suddenly it's no longer a black or a white thing, it's humanity standing up. And I think that there's a clue in that. So my hope for our congregation, that as a body of people, we can explore these issues so that we can all be better educated, and that we can all find a way where we can contribute to stopping this type of discrimination. And it has such a long history, and it is time for change. So that's my hope as a body, and I believe we are the body of Yeshua. So I believe we can go on this journey, Isaac, and that way, you know, we're in this together, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, Yeshua himself gave the golden rule in that he said that we ought to treat others as we ourselves, expect to be treated. And I think personally, as believers, we have a responsibility to act against, injustice. I think the book of Isaiah, it says, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and plead, the widow's cause. So I think you're right in that it's a journey that we all have to go on, to address this. And silence is not the answer.
No, absolutely not, Isaac.
And the reason why I say that is because we mentioned earlier about the multicultural congregation, and some of our members may look at this situation, look at our members and say, we have a high majority of black members. And they can stand back and say, I don't really have a problem with black people. But that's not the real issue we're looking at here, is it? No. And I think it stems a lot deeper, than that, because it's depth of feeling.
Absolutely.
On individual members, of our congregation. And because of that multicultural membership, we all benefit from each other's culture. I'm going to be quite carnal here, and that is, I really love Caribbean food. Okay, so that's one benefit I get from being in a multicultural, congregation. But we also read in the book of Acts that Yahweh shows no favoritism, does he? No. Towards any individual. He accepts people from every nation. So that's black, that's white. So, as a congregation, we have a responsibility to treat others in the way that we want to be treated. Do you think the church body can embrace that concept more?
The answer is yes. I think as a body, I think the church can and should embrace that concept more. You mentioned earlier on that this has generated a strong depth of feeling. And I think there's so much for us as a body to learn and to understand, to be able to move forward and bring about a change, and more so to equip our church and equip our members. In my family, as a household, I'm trying to equip my children with the challenges that they are likely to face as they get older because of the colour of their skin. But I'm part of a family, I'm part of Yahweh's family, and I think that if we can equip our members so that we stand together to face such issues, then absolutely. In short, the answer is absolutely yes. And there's so much that we can positively learn from these issues. It's difficult to, it's such a broad subject matter, but the solution is definitely in us being prepared to go on a journey of learning and educating one another. History itself plays a big part in where we are.
And that should be a lesson as well.
Yes.
History should be a lesson in itself.
Yes. It's really difficult because through my upbringing, apart from what I was taught from my father, Black history was only related to slavery. But the history is so much more than that. And I think it's these, once we start to understand how deeply embedded racism and discrimination is, we can see where we can begin to make changes. Of course. So that there's equality. And in Yahweh's kingdom, it's all about equality. It would be very difficult for me to try and open that up in this space, but I just, in a nutshell, I want to say that if we can go on a journey as a body of people, I believe that it will be enriching for us all, and that I think for me, myself, I would feel supported by my congregation in that.
In that measure. We're going to come into a close in a couple of minutes, but something that I've observed with being in the congregation for many, many years, and that is this, because in this issue that we're looking at now, one of the key issues that we will succeed or fail on is whether we are able to listen. And I say that because so often a greeting that we often say to one another is, how are you feeling? And I think sometimes we may not be prepared to hear what the answer is. So in my opinion, I think this issue will rise and fall on that, whether we are willing, to listen to how people are feeling. Absolutely. Have you got anything else you would like to say to our viewers?
One thing that I want to say is that something that's really important for me is that this congregation, Isaac, I experienced the love of Yeshua in such a measure that it's why I'm still here. It covers over everything. And the love of Yeshua that I've experienced in this congregation has been unlike I've experienced anywhere. So Yeshua is here, and the love of Yeshua is here. And when I experience that, my past experiences, what I've been through, none of that matters, because I am met in that manner.
So your faith, in effect, has
Yes.
helped you navigate through this issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think because the love of Yeshua is here, is present, I am hopeful that we can go on this journey in relation to this matter, and it be fruitful for us as a congregation. I do believe that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nat. I appreciate you sharing and being upfront and honest. And hopefully this will bring some awareness, to our viewers, because you've kind of come a little vulnerable, because you've shared a bit of your, of yourself and your own experience. So thank you. I really appreciate you sharing.